Welcome to the Matt Kuda Photography Podcast, a podcast about nature and wildlife photography in your own backyard and throughout the United States. Okay, welcome to Behind the Shot. If you will, please click on the link in the show notes. It will take you to my Flickr account. You will see the image for today. Now, the image for today is actually not wildlife. It is actually a waterfall here in North Carolina called Moravian Falls. And it's actually in the town of Moravian Falls. And this is a falls that's one of these strange places that you just come upon, and it doesn't even look like it's really a rural kind of location. I mean, it is rural, but it's kind of right in the middle of things. This was a shot that I took right after I bought my first digital camera. It was probably maybe the third shoot that I went on. And so it's definitely a special image to me. And I do love to shoot waterfalls. I will shoot waterfalls usually 2 to 3 times a year. I will go out and shoot waterfalls. Let's talk about what I did here to actually set this shot up, because I think that's important. You know, what you're looking at is this is a very signature type shot for me, and you'll see this repeated over and over and over again in my images. What you have is a strong foreground. Okay, so let's take a look at that first. If we were to look at this image, what do you see in the foreground? We have a band of rocks here to our left. We have a band of rocks to our right, and we have a small cascade in the foreground. Now, what does this do? This leads your eye into this photograph. And what it does is, because of that, it gives it depth. It gives it dimension. It takes that two-dimensional photograph and makes it so I feel like I can actually reach into that photograph. I can walk through this scene. And as we move back through from the foreground to the middle ground, my eye is still being led back to the pool of water behind this cascade, and then finally to the actual waterfall itself. Now, this is actually a massive waterfall, and you can't tell in this photograph, can you? Why did I do that? Why did I not emphasize the strength and power of this waterfall? Because everyone else has already done that. I wanted to show the gentle flowing water of the creek, and then lead your eye back toward the waterfall, and thereby, kind of emphasize peace and tranquility and happiness. If I were to just get in tight on that big waterfall, I'd be showing power and majesty, and still beauty, but majesty and strength. I chose not to do that here, and I think it worked very well for this photograph. The other thing that's interesting about this photograph is the time of day. I shot this very early in the morning. I know it was early in the morning because I actually shot this on the way to work. This was shot at about, I want to say 7 o'clock in the morning, roughly. And you can see it's got nice morning, soft light coming in. I think it helps really emphasize this photograph. I think that helps it out a great deal. So this is some of the things that you want to look for in your own photographs to really make a difference. Some of the specs on this, I shot it with my Canon 1D Mark II. I shot it with a very inexpensive, and I mean very inexpensive, old school Canon lens called the Canon 22 to 55 millimeter EF mount lens. I shot it at f/22, 29 millimeters, 15 seconds. Excuse me. This was a 15-second exposure at ISO 200. Now, why 15 seconds? Well, because that's what it took. It was so dark, it actually took 15 seconds to actually create the exposure at f/22. Why f/22? I wanted a lot of depth of field. I wanted maximum hyperfocal distance, and so I focused on the rocks to my left in the foreground, and I said f/22, giving me pretty much full depth of field throughout the scene. Very important, I think, in this type of photograph. The water here is done using this long exposure technique. And if you create a really, really long exposure, like 15 seconds, you can blur relatively slow-moving water. And this was kind of not slow water, but not real fast water either. And you start getting into this real cotton candy look. And you just have to bracket. And bracket is simply opening shortening your shutter speed and lengthening your shutter speed. Opening up your aperture f/16 maybe. Trying different things to get different looks, different exposures, different water movement. That's what being a waterfall photographer is all about. The other thing I did here is I had a polarizer, which further made the exposure even longer. A polarizer, I think, is essential in this situation. You need a polarizer to bring out the or shut down the reflections of the water on the rocks. Reflections on wet rocks is horrible. It looks awful. Not only that, but the water itself will actually reflect back, and it will just be a terrible sheen. You always, 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 in my opinion, want a polarizing filter on your lens. They're very inexpensive. I don't want to say they're very inexpensive. You can get a Tiffin filter fairly inexpensively, and they're a decent company. So that's pretty much it. That is Moravian Falls, North Carolina. I hope you enjoyed it. Thanks for listening. Make it a great day, and get out there and enjoy nature. Bye-bye. Music for this episode was provided by Dr. Turtle.